Hi, everybody. I'm Stephen King. I'm the director of the Des Moines Arts Festival. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here today to our quarterly seat at the table. It's my pleasure I'm just going to hand it over to Kate Heitschuh, who will be our host and moderator for today's panel. Kate?
Thanks, Stephen. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Most of you, if you are repeat guests of ours, we welcome you back. And for anyone who's new, very briefly, a Seat at the Table series started through a collaborative conversation with myself and Stephen about the critical importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and specifically equity in the arts space. And so at the height of the pandemic, we started this series online. We've decided to go ahead and keep it virtual because it really allows for sort of broader participation in some regard. But normally I would spend a few moments talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and equity within arts in a broad and general sense. But today we have a very unique, special, important, critical, urgent conversation that we, meaning the Des Moines Arts Festival and myself, feel very passionate about. And so in order to give our panelists the most amount of time possible to get to know all of you and for you to get to know them more importantly, we're going to just sort of dig right in. So one of the things I want to start off by saying is that in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space in general, oftentimes, right, the focus is on communities of color, gender, sexual orientation, persons with different abilities, and we kind of all know what those demographic, historical silos are of how we see people. And one area of our community that I guess I personally feel very strongly about, that often sort of goes, unheard, under acknowledged, and in many ways, sort of the unsung song, right, of the DEI space, has to do with, our important community members who have criminal backgrounds and who either are or have been incarcerated. And, if we think DEI is difficult enough when it comes to topics of what I would say the most included parts of this conversation, communities of color, gender, and things of that nature, I would have to say that the underlying message that often resonates is that the struggle and barriers to equity and inclusion seem to be less emphasized when it comes to people who have been incarcerated. And that's simply because of the strong social stigma, the bias, unbelievable amount of bias, assumptions that are associated with criminal backgrounds, with incarceration. And it's almost, I don't think I hear people saying this, but to me, again, the underlying sense is that maybe somehow this is less important because of the bias that maybe someone's done something wrong or done something to put themselves in a certain situation. And I just have to say, those are biases, those are myths, and we have got to have this conversation. When it comes to equity and inclusion, we're dedicated to making sure that the experience includes all people, not just those that we deem as worthy by some social sort of measurement or data point or quantitative analysis. So this is an incredibly important conversation. It's super unique. I'm very privileged and honored to be a part of this. As you know, I've said this many times, every time we have one of these events, our perspectives come from a place of cultural sensitivity. We've learned in the past that cultural sensitivity is simply acknowledging differences and similarities both, but without judging, assigning value, moralizing, or trying to say that one is right or wrong, but simply acknowledging, right? And that's making sure that voices are heard and people are seen. So that's kind of the background that we come from. So I'm just going to jump right in and introduce to you our amazing key leaders and change agents of Justice Arts Coalition. We have with us today Wendy Jason, Carole Alden, and Brett Gonzalez. And, I do want to acknowledge Stephen and Daphne. Stephen, of course, is the executive director of the Des Moines Arts Festival, and Daphne is the director of guest engagement and production. And today they have asked that they do not speak because they want to give 100% of the time to our amazing panelists. So first, I'd like to introduce to everyone Wendy Jason. And Wendy Jason is founder of the Justice Arts Coalition and has over 25 years of experience working in close relationship with currently and formerly incarcerated people to transform and promote social justice, and is from the Baltimore, DC area. Wendy was inspired from a very young age. I think these are my words from listening to her story. Inspired by her attentiveness to the human experiences of all people. And Wendy, I think I still, despite our conversations, messed up your title. And so I apologize in advance, but Wendy, what an honor to have you here today. I would love to meet you in person and give you the biggest hug after hug that I could. I adore your heart and your journey. Really excited for our audience to meet and experience you, and of course the gifts and knowledge that you have to share. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What's inspired you throughout your journey to bring us where you are today?
Kate, thank you so much. That was the sweetest introduction. I'm really touched. And I feel really heard. I think I rambled off a lot about myself to you, and you found the nugget and just reflected it back to me, and that means a lot. And I was kind of needing that this morning, so thank you. Or this afternoon. Hi, everyone. My name is Wendy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the founder and the executive director of Justice Arts Coalition. My title has changed a few times over the last couple of years while we find like the right fit. But yes, as Kate said, we are based in the DC area, just outside of DC in Silver Spring, Maryland. Justice Arts Coalition is a national organization that utilizes the arts as a way to connect people inside and outside of prison. And this, this journey for me into this work has been a very long, winding one. But as you said, Kate, it started for me at a very young age, and having just kind of a magnetism towards people who had found themselves kind of in the margins of my community. And for me, that came from a very personal place of having a similar experience in my own home, in my own school, and in my own community, and really wanting to ensure that other people who shared that experience with me knew that they mattered and knew that there was someone out there who saw them as valuable, beautiful, dynamic human beings. And that's very much what I needed someone to do for me. So that, that has kind of carried me through many years. I worked for many years in the social services realm. That was a difficult fit for me because in many ways, our social service system mirrors our criminal legal system in the ways that it dehumanizes people, in the ways that it others people, in the ways that it creates hierarchy and power imbalances with people, and that wasn't comfortable for me. So, at some point in my early 30s or late 20s, I kind of found a light, which was came in the form of my introduction to restorative justice and ways in which we could address conflict in our communities, in our families, in all of our relationships, and harm when it happened that were not punitive, were not retributive, that really acknowledged and centered the experiences of everyone who was impacted, and allowed space for everyone to have a story, and a story that mattered, and a story that needed to be heard. And that really spoke to me. And so I pursued some higher education around conflict transformation and restorative practices. And in doing so, was introduced to the ways in which the arts can play a role in restoring relationship when there's been harm, in reconciliation, in peace building. And that's kind of what opened me up to this idea of, what might happen if we could utilize creative expression as a way to connect with folks in prison, which was the population of a huge, right, massive in our country population of people who I kind of carried with me in a very heavy way in my heart, and wanted to somehow connect with. And so through that curiosity for me, I ended up facilitating a creative writing group at a county jail in New Mexico outside of Albuquerque. And that was a really transformative experience for me and for the guys who were in my group with me. We shared in that experience together, a great deal of, we shared parts of ourselves, myself included, but I think maybe more true for the guys, that we hadn't really been able to share before. And for them, especially, we created a container within this facility that, as part of this larger system, did everything it possibly could to strip people of their story, of their identity, of the dynamic parts of their being, and of being anything except for that number and that label that's been attached to them. We got to see each other as really full, vibrant human beings who have something to share, something of value, of worth, that's incredibly meaningful to share. And they got to do that in this one little classroom, right? And then they'd have to go out of that classroom and kind of, wall themselves back off. I mean, there were guys in my group who were able to connect with each other in ways that they absolutely could not do outside of that classroom. They could not emote in the same way. They could not even, in some cases, they really weren't even supposed to look each other in the eye just because of the differences in their backgrounds, whatever. So it was a really, really unique space, and a really nurturing, formative space for them and for me. And so when I left that, and two, I should say, I saw these guys who really had been, stripped of so much, and who had so little, in my mind, coming in, so few sources of inspiration around them. It's such a bleak setting, but yet tapping into these incredible reserves of creativity and these incredibly strong, beautiful voices. And it was okay, I need to keep whatever that is, whatever I did, and I don't know what I did, but whatever I did in there, I want to keep doing it. And I guess maybe I didn't do anything. I just showed up, I think, and somehow evoked trust, just maybe by just being me and non-threatening in some way. But I want to keep doing that. And so that's what led me to get involved with what was then called the Prison Arts Coalition, which was an online resource, a website that had all kinds of information about arts programs in prisons and other kinds of detention facilities across the country, a blog, some art galleries that had been started by a group of teaching artists that all provided programming in prison as a way to share the work that their students were doing, as a way to bring attention to just how essential creative expression is in the lives of people, all people, but especially people who have been removed and locked away from us. And I just started volunteering with them, helping them to manage the website. And that was 2011. And since then, there was a large effort across the country to a real interest in creating an organization that kind of could serve as a unifying body for all of the people who were providing arts programming in prison, or really invested in the idea of creating opportunities for creative expression for people who were incarcerated. And so I kind of set to, over the last several years, set to the work of creating that organization out of what had initially just been a website. And so since 2019, that's what I've been doing full time. And we now, we're still a small team. We're still a very grassroots organization. It's myself, and we just hired a program assistant yesterday. One of our interns got to step up, which is phenomenal. And I've had an amazing team of interns over the past couple of years helping to keep the motor running of this organization. We work with upwards of 500 artists who are incarcerated across the country. We share their work in a number of different ways, through exhibitions, through online galleries and portfolios. And we have a number of programs that support connection between those artists and people on the outside, to share feedback, to share sources of inspiration. We have a pen pal program. We have other letter writing initiatives. It really is all about relationship building and connection. And then we do a lot of work with organizations and teaching artists on the outside that provide programming inside, just to create kind of a community of support for those folks. And that became really, really important during the pandemic, when most of them were locked out of their programs. During the pandemic, prisons went into lockdown, no programming whatsoever. So folks who whose livelihoods had been going inside providing these programs, and who had communities in there and people they cared about, were shut out from that. And so we did what we could to provide support for them in that way. So that was a lot of words, and that's kind of where we are now. We are growing very, very quickly, working hard to create a really strong infrastructure for the organization, and can use any support that folks want to offer. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities, tons and tons of volunteer opportunities. And and through my work, I've had the pleasure of getting to know and become friends with and colleagues with a number of artists who are or have been incarcerated. And you'll get to meet two of those artists today, Carole and Brett. And both Carole and I and Brett and I go quite a few years back. I think I've known Carole for 5-6 years now, and Brett for probably 4. And it's always a real pleasure and honor for me to be able to share space with them. I've learned so much from the artists that I've gotten to know and work with, and these two probably more than any others. So I think y'all are very fortunate to get to hear from them today. And I'll wrap up there. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. So I think you're right. We are very fortunate to be able to hear from both Brett and Carole. I know that I was deeply moved and inspired by getting to meet them the other day. Brett will be joining us shortly, and so Wendy, you can just let me know when that time comes. But while we have a few more minutes, you shared a story with me because I think one of the things that's interesting about the role that you play and how you've transformed and sort of the journey that you've taken. You shared with me sort of your reflections as a young person in your childhood, and somehow having the ability at a very early age to see yourself in others' shoes, right? And because I think I want to bring up some very candid parts of this conversation, which is that when people look at you, right, because race and gender are such a huge part of this conversation these days. I've never been one to hold back on the tough conversation. So, people look at you and they see, white female, right? And they go, oh, well, but tell us, like, I was so moved by when you shared with me sort of your childhood and spending a lot of time reflecting and seeing other people's lives that you knew, and somehow knowing that, right, your life could be different if you were different. And so I think that really is an inspiration. And I just want people to know that inside that part of your heart, because I think it's so important to the story.
Thank you. And I don't know if I can retell it in the same way, but I'll try.
Okay, you don't have to.
Yeah, so I don't know where like the seeds of this, I don't know. And I'm certainly no like superwoman when it comes to awareness. But there was so I grew up in a home in which I had all of the material comforts that I needed. Yes, in a white home, in a predominantly white community, a very wealthy community, outside of New York City in Connecticut. I had really top-notch education at my disposal. I had access to any kind of learning I wanted. I had access to like sports and the arts and, really everything that I needed in terms of, filling my brain, and filling my belly. But I didn't have what I needed to fill my heart. And I did not have, my home was very unstable. And I had a single mom who was not well at all, and pretty much absent. And when she wasn't physically absent, she was emotionally absent. And I felt very much alone. I had 3 older sisters who were much older, so gone. So, you know, felt very abandoned, very alone, very invisible throughout most of my childhood. But I also did, for whatever reason, have an awareness that there were other people out there within my community and in the very nearby neighboring communities that were having a very, like, with whom I had something in common around invisibility, but was very different from, and that I had things at my disposal. I had privilege because of my whiteness, because of my socioeconomic status, that folks around me didn't have. I think that was in part that I had a lot of curiosity about other people's experiences from a very young age. I wanted to understand people's experiences. I was drawn very early to, one of my sisters was like a sociology and women's studies major in college, and she left all her her old books at home, and I would, I really had nothing to do with my time a lot. So I did like a lot of snooping and a lot of poking around my sister's bedrooms and like just nosy, trying to put pieces together of life, both my own family and life out there and other people's experiences. And so, yeah, so in like 6th grade, I'm like reading Gloria Steinem and like, sociology texts and stuff like that. So that probably was pretty formative. Before I could even fully understand and have like my own language for what I was absorbing, I knew that there was something really off, and that there were these massive inequities, and that, I mean, I could see it in my own community, right? I could see how the majority of the people of color who were not super duper wealthy were over there in that apartment building, by like down on the other side of town, like tucked away, right? And that they were struggling, and that they were not supposed to be visible to, your average person who was coming to hang out in, yes, Greenwich, Connecticut for a few days. I could just see like the little things like that really stood out to me. And then as I got older, they became glaring. And I wanted to understand more and learn more and learn more. And I just had this like insatiable hunger for an understanding of not just like the inequities in our society and how they impacted other people, how they impacted me, how they kept us separate, how they worked against relationship, against community, but also the fight. Like there was, especially, come high school, early college, there was like this fire. I was angry. I was rebellious. I needed to be like everything that my mother was not, and my mother was very conservative. And so I wanted to understand too how people resisted, how people fought. So I became very interested in learning, about resistance movements, the civil rights movement, and kind of was absorbing all of that. So I've carried all of that, with me. Something that I've been really kind of disappointed in myself about over the last couple of years is, as I've, become the founder of a nonprofit organization and the director, and like this organization is my life. Like it's all I eat, breathe, sleep. I actually have been learning less. Like I learn about anything that's directly connected with my organization and the work that we do and the people that we're connected with, but the broader scope kind of has to get pushed aside, and that is really uncomfortable for me, and something that I've spent a lot of time kind of sitting, reflecting on, and maybe beating myself up about and not doing anything about. But that's where I am now, is I had this really rich early experience of learning that was super formative and really like shaped the trajectory of my life. And I want that back. Like I want that like hunger for knowledge back, and that time back to like to really dive in.
Yeah, I love that. So you totally told the story the same way. Like it had a few nuances, but that's exactly what I wanted our audience to know, because I think it's so important. It amplifies the magnitude of Justice Arts Coalition and who you are and what you do, and Brett and Carole and their stories. The magnitude, again, it's so much louder when people can understand sort of that piece of the journey, because I think it's really critical because, like I said, we tend to make assumptions. Even all of us on this call who are probably all fairly DEI minded, we still tend to do these things where we look at someone and go, oh, okay, I get it. And it's like, no, no, no. Let's learn. Let's try to understand and experience who Wendy is, because I think that's so important to the story. You know, I think that when you talk about, you know, the nonprofit and how you've had to sort of narrow maybe the passion and experiential scope in order to focus on, right, the entity and the nonprofit and actually the structure of the business, so to speak. I think that that's a stage, right, in development that people often go through. And so, you know, it's almost like the organization is simply a vessel that's necessary in order to continue to facilitate the passion. So I'm very encouraged to know that this is hopefully, you know, something that, right, is a trade-off for you so that you are able to continue to find that fire, in spite of, right, having all of these sort of like administrative or other business priorities that you need to take care of. We're going to come back to this multiple times throughout this, but if there was one or two calls to action, right? Because it's all great for us to sit here and listen to this conversation, and we're going to feel something while we're, you know, during these 90 minutes, and we're going to love who Carole is and feel, you know, excited by Brett's artwork. But at the end of the day, when we all sign off, what do we need to do to actually move the feelings and thoughts into some form of action that actually moves the needle?
So what has been most essential for me in my life, I think, is my connection with people inside. And one thing I didn't mention is that I started writing to a pen pal who was incarcerated when I was in like 9th grade. And that, you know, that relationship meant a lot to me, and it lasted quite a few years. And even every once in a while, he'll pop back up. He's cycled in and out of prison. I think is still incarcerated now, or incarcerated again now. So my call to action is, don't let this be the last of your listening. And there are many opportunities. Of course, I'm biased towards the ones that we at Justice Arts Coalition create, but there are many opportunities to build connections with folks inside. And those connections are integral for them and their well-being and their sense of connectedness to a community that they've, you know, been ripped away from. But they're equally valuable for us in the ways that we can be learning about what the experience of being incarcerated is like for people. And I don't think that you can hear directly from someone who's inside about those experiences, those day-to-day experiences, without then being moved to do something towards changing this. And whether it makes you a full-fledged abolitionist, or it makes you want to think about, well, how can we just be a little bit more humane within this? There's a whole spectrum of that. You know, I know where I stand on it, and I'm not going to tell anyone else where they should stand, but you will be compelled to do something. And that something is going to have to be whatever feels most meaningful for each person here. But I would say root that something in a relationship, in an opportunity to really learn about someone's experience from them, not from what we see in the media, you know, not from whatever assumptions and like stories are passed down in community, family, school, whatever. Listen. That's what
Absolutely. So I think we'll probably be able to talk to Brett here in a couple of minutes. What do you want us to know about Brett before he joins us?
Brett's a powerhouse. So Brett is the chairperson of our board of directors at Justice Arts Coalition. He's supposed to have a co-chair. It is not easy at all to be the chair of a board from prison. He does not have access to Gmail. He does not have access to the internet. He cannot get on Google Sheets and make a spreadsheet. He can't text one of us when he's not going to be able to make it to a meeting. He has oh, and he's calling. Shall I? Okay. Okay, I'm going to mute for 1 sec.
Awesome. Another thing that I'll share with the audience while we're waiting is that Brett is only able to make one 15-minute phone call at a time without taking a break in between. So I appreciate the audience's flexibility here, but I believe we'll have Brett joining us now.
Yep, we've got Brett.
Hey, Brett.
Hello.
How
That's
are you
me
today?
talking.
I'm doing well. How's everyone doing today?
Wonderful. So Brett, thank you so much for all of your careful planning and scheduling, because I know that, you had to make some, particular arrangements in order to be with us today. So thank you so much for doing that. I am just so excited to introduce you to our audience today. So everyone, joining us on the call is Brett Gonzalez. Brett is a JAC artist, JAC Board Chair, originally from San Antonio, Texas, convening with us from the inside, currently incarcerated at a federal facility in Fort Worth, Texas. Brett, your artwork is absolutely breathtaking. I spent some time on the JAC website and was quite moved and inspired by your creativity and art that you have featured there. Brett was inspired by a friend during the early days of first becoming incarcerated, who then encouraged him to use drawing as a coping mechanism and self-wellness tool. Soon, Brett enrolled in the institution's hobby craft program, where became the protege and mentee to a friend. Brett, welcome again. Thank you for joining with us. I wanted to start out with just allowing our audience to get to know you better. As much as you're comfortable with, can you please share your journey with the audience? And we'd love to know how you became really enlightened or aware of art as healing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you for such a great introduction and spending some time looking at my work. I always appreciate that. So prior to incarceration, I think that the best way to describe my life, my lifestyle was one of chaos. Very, very chaotic, very unfortunately self-destructive. It wasn't good. And a lot of it, was one, as I got caught up in the things that were going on, there wasn't really a lot of time for self introspection, to look within inside myself, see how I feel with what's going on, see how I feel with what I'm doing, and being able to get a sense of if I'm being true to myself as a person or not. I just very much got caught up in everything that was going on and very much fed into that kind of chaotic environment and became comfortable there. It wasn't until I became incarcerated that I find myself with a lot of time on my hands to kind of start to make questions and start to ask myself, when I live within that chaos, how do I actually feel? Is it comforting? Is it uncomfortable? Do I feel agitated? Why do I feel agitated? And with those kind of questions, I found art kind of helped be able to explore those. I think the biggest part was when I met my art mentor, Henry David Potwin, who was just an amazing artist. He would, after painting a couple paintings, and I would choose different subject matter, and I would try to paint them, and he would help me through it. He asked me, he said, "Why did you choose to paint this? Right? Of all the things that you could have painted, why did you paint this?" And I didn't have an answer for him immediately. And he told me, when I see your work, I see a person who's very lonely and who's really isolated from not just society, not just from people, but isolated from himself. And being able to look at my own work through this lens, through this helps me see that my work can allow me to kind of get a gauge of how I feel and how I think and how I can start to explore, that inner world. And so that's kind of how art kind of entered into my life in that way.
Yeah, thank you. I thought it was an interesting observation that your mentor made when he said, what I see in your artwork is you being isolated. And he clarified that even one step further to say isolated even from yourself. What are some of the things that when you're able to create, how are you able to reconnect with yourself? What does art do for you in that way to help you, like I said, just really reground or reconnect just with yourself as an individual?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, in those moments when I am deep within the right brain art creation moment where language fades away, where time fades away, where the music I have shoved into my ears to kind of block out all the rest of the noise fades away, when everything's gone and I'm in the middle of that work, really the only thing I'm left is with me. And it's a pre-language me, it's a real me. And in that time, I get to really spend time with myself. And that's something that wouldn't come about just normally going through my day, because I'm usually so preoccupied with just the day-to-day life kind of stuff. But art gives me that space and time to do that.
That's amazing. Can you share with us, with the audience, a little bit about the transformation as, maybe from the time when you first became acquainted with art to the evolution of where you're at with art today? It wasn't that long ago where art was not a familiar resource to you, and now you are not only, an artist, but you're a board chair and you're doing this event for us today. And I feel like even while incarcerated, you have evolved and transformed yourself and your focus in ways that I find extremely impressive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that one, it's not for me, it was about a very long process. I've been incarcerated for almost 12 years now. I was on pretrial for years before that. I've been kind of separated for a while. It's definitely nothing that happened overnight for sure. But just like the quality of or the tangibleness of my art didn't come out overnight either. It was a slow process of developing and putting in the time and putting in the effort. I'm extremely grateful for organizations like JAC to be able to provide platforms, not only for me to start to show my work, and so I can start to build that kind of confidence when it comes to being able to speak for myself, but also this amazing opportunity, right, to actually participate as a vocal member on a core function of the organization itself as a board chair. It definitely would not have been something that would have happened or worked very well 14 years ago when I was prior to incarceration or prior to coming into contact with the government. It would have been very different, and it's definitely not something that's finished. But I feel like there's tools, and art is one of those aspects of those tools. It's something that is always there.
Sure. So when you first met Wendy and JAC, what was that like? And can you tell us a little bit more about your story, just in terms of the relationship you've developed over time with Justice Arts Coalition?
Yeah, I mean, originally I reached out to JAC because I was my mentor had left home, which is amazing, but it kind of left me stranded and kind of by myself again when it comes to kind of having conversations about art. I had an outside volunteer reach out they did a Google search essentially and found the organization. When I first connected with Wendy, it's a little disconcerting to hear someone be kind and helpful and wanting to see my artwork, because it's very counter to what I it's very counter to what I deal with every day here, right? It's a lot of chaos and a lot of separation, a lot of angst, among us. So it felt almost unreal. But as just continual process of being able to actually see this unfold and work with Wendy and start to work with some of the other interns and other be able to participate in exhibits out in the world, I got to see that this was not only something real, which was very meaningful, but it was something that I can be real with too. And that really, helped strengthen that.
That's amazing. A little bit later when we talk to you again, we're going to talk about your vision for reentry and how you see art continuing to be a resource. But if you were to share with the audience, if you had an ultimate artist dream, not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, but say, life dream when it comes to art's role in your life and your relationship with art, what does that look like?
Well, I would love to say that it's about, full, complete self-mastery and self-understanding. But a part of it is, and this sounds really weird to talk about in such an audience, but I would like to have a piece of mine, an artwork that I make, purchased and made part of a museum collection. I am so...
This call is from a federal prison.
For me, art is a conversation. It's a conversation that's been going on for a long, long time, right? Man and walls and caves and paint. And I want to join that conversation, and I want to have some kind of say in it that will resonate with hopefully other people and make impact throughout time past just my life. And it's a way to kind of help overcome or I kind of correct the mistakes I've made in the past, but it's also a way I hope for people to kind of learn that there's different ways of seeing the world, and maybe I have a voice that can contribute to that conversation, and that's my ultimate goal is to be part of that.
I'm so glad I asked you that question. So audience, Brett's ultimate life dream is to be featured in, have a piece purchased by a museum and have the ability to have a larger national, or even global conversation that can make an impact on a matter that is, like I said, under-acknowledged for sure, and that's probably an understatement. I'm going to be thinking about that for you, because I think it's a conversation that you can have an impact on. You can add valuable meaning and change. And so I think that Brett may have just left his first 15-minute call.
Still got a minute on the call.
Oh, awesome. Okay. This picture just changed and threw me off. So, it's something that I think the world needs a lot more of, Brett. Definitely awareness. I think a lot of folks have passion to take action, but don't always know what to do or don't know how to respond. One of the biggest things I find in the diversity, equity, inclusion realm when it comes to difficult conversations is people have a fear of saying the wrong things, and so often the conversations aren't had. So I think this is a great opportunity really to learn and to help make way to have these important conversations. So we're going to be talking with Brett a little bit later. As I said before, the facility that he is at requires that he wait in between each 15-minute phone call. So in the meantime, I'm as equally excited to introduce everyone to Carole Alden. Carole, are you there?
I am.
Hey, hi. Carole, you know, I had a ton of respect for you when I talked to you the first time, and then I got on your GoFundMe page and read your story and looked at all your pictures and just blown away. So audience, with great honor and privilege, I want to introduce everyone to Carole Alden. What a trailblazer you are. We're so fortunate to have you here with us today. Carole is coming to us live from the Utah desert. Carole is a previously incarcerated JAC artist, JAC Advisory Council member, and founder of Desert Shelter Plus Healing Art Project. Carole was born in 1960 in Orleans, France, to American parents, was raised in northern Idaho and Colorado. Her father was a forestry professor and mother a librarian. Nature and self-empowerment were childhood themes. With no formal art education or training, Carole was a fiber artist, a very successful fiber artist, with pieces showcased in multiple museum collections, both nationally and internationally prior to incarceration. Carole lives in the Utah desert, right outside of, let's see, she told me the city right before,
Cedar City.
Utah, yes, thank you. Lives right outside of Cedar City, Utah, in the Utah desert. Has an absolutely compelling and passionate GoFundMe page that provides incredible insight about her experiences, her challenges, and her vision for the Desert Fish House with Desert Shelter and Healing Art Project. Now, before I let Carole tell us a lot about herself, I have to tell our audience, please go to Carole's GoFundMe page. I don't typically make asks like this at this event, but I am so glad that I did, because I learned so much. It was unbelievable. I was like glued to the page, and then somebody needed something, and I was like frustrated that I had to come back to it later. So again, if we're looking for action, please go to Carole's GoFundMe page, and we'll remind you multiple times before the end of the session. So Carole, it's about 100 degrees where you're at right now. I know you had to drive probably an hour just to get to a location that you could join us today. Welcome, and will you share your story with us?
Yes, I'm happy to. Oh boy, what a journey. You know, things are never the way you think they're going to be when you start out in life. I was a mom. I had 5 kids, and I had a vibrant international career with my artwork. I had a gentleman insinuate himself into my life under false pretenses, and didn't realize he was a professional con artist that had actually married and killed 5 women before me. So I was way out of my league as far as, you know, awareness of a lot of different things. I was the only woman who survived him. I chose to defend myself at the end, and I went to prison. Utah didn't have any self-defense statutes at that point in time. And even when places do, it's always pretty sketchy for women in domestic violence situations. They have a tendency to say, well, you know, you must have done something to cause it. So that was what took me to prison to begin with. And it was just, you know, the devastation of being separated from my children. 3 of them were essentially adults, and 2 of them were still at home. I had a 14-year-old and a 9-year-old. And I had always been very involved with public art events and installations, and my kids were basically my pit crew. And so they were always involved with whatever I was doing. Anytime I went and spoke at a international fiber arts symposium, I took all my kids with me. I usually had a baby at the time. The last project that I worked on prior, just the month before, was my first welding piece. And it was this floating sea dragon that I built out of 2,000 feet of steel. And it ended up being 90 feet long and 18 feet tall, and I engineered it to float. But I taught my son how to cut all the steel pieces, and I taught my little daughter how to bend all the steel pieces. And so they had a big hand in the creation of this piece. And then after I would do a weld, I gave them super soakers to quench the welds, which makes them stronger. So, you know, everything was just really family oriented. And to be yanked out of that and put into, well, just about as foreign of an environment as I could have ever imagined. It was a real shock. And I spent a good deal of time in solitary confinement on suicide watch in the beginning. And at that point, the only thing you could do was draw. And so I tried to maintain a connection with my children and grandchildren by making coloring pages for them. And so a lot of the, if you happen to see any of the drawings that I did of mermaids and fish and things, these were all things that I did for my children. And I would make copies of them that were just in black and white, just line drawings, so that they could color them. And then I would also gift them with one that I had colored myself. And when I finally, you know, the judicial process takes a while, and it was about a year before I was transported to prison. And once I got to prison, then about 3 years in, I decided to teach myself how to crochet. Well, somebody else tried to teach me how to crochet, and they were not successful. I had no idea. You know, people's hands move too fast, and I didn't understand what was going on. It was kind of embarrassing, but I persevered, and I thought, if these guys can do it, I should be able to do it. And but I approached it differently because I was a sculptor. So for me, I would envision a 3-dimensional form, and then it was like the yarn was a line that you were just drawing around the surface of that 3-dimensional form. And that was how I figured out in my head, you know, where things needed to be larger or smaller, or, you know, go in or stick out. And then I wanted things to hold their own form. I didn't want to do things that were flat. And so I started making layers and stitching them together by hand. So it created a very firm, stiff, like wall almost. So like the big fish that I've crocheted, they're all hollow. You know, you can stick your hand all the way inside of them. And I would also put anywhere from 3 to 5 strands of yarn on one crochet hook. And so it was very, very tight. It was almost like carpet backing. And in that way, I was able to create structural things that wouldn't crush or just, you know, flop over. And that way you got around, you know, all the regulations about not being allowed to have anything stuffed because they're afraid you're going to hide something inside of it. The officers really didn't know kind of what to do. This was something they'd never seen before. And it didn't fit within any of the rules that they had. And so sometimes I was able to get away with it. The prison itself was very restrictive and punitive towards any kind of creativity. I'm always amazed when I hear about prisons that actually have art programs. I'm just like, wow, you know, I can't even imagine that. In Utah, you would have to put in a contract to ask permission to make something, and it had to be signed by the officer, the sergeant, the lieutenant, the deputy warden, and you had to provide receipts for any of the materials that you bought to create this thing. You had to give a very graphic description of what it was going to be. And it took months to get it approved. So good luck trying to make something in time for, you know, Christmas or your kid's birthday or anything that helps maintain an emotional connection with your family. You know, Utah says they're all family oriented. Well, that's a bunch of crap. You know, it's only if you're a certain kind of person. Everybody else, they act like you don't deserve to have a family, and they do everything they can to be a barrier to you doing things for your family or talking to your family, or being able to spend time with them. It's just absolutely insane.
Carole, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Something interesting that you said is that the prison that you were incarcerated at was very punitive whenever it came to anything artistic. Do you think, can you share with us why you think that art was seen as such a threat? Is it because being creative can, encourage empowerment? Or what's your theory on why something that, I'm sure everyone on this call would see as a wonderful use of time, like especially like you said, as a connector and a way to continue to build your relationships with your family and such. Why was it so punitive towards creative projects?
First and foremost, it was this, kind of old school biblical eye for an eye, blood atonement. You are there to be punished. So therefore, you should not be doing anything that they perceive as you enjoying it. You're basically, they want you to curl up in a fetal position and think about what you did for, however long you're incarcerated. You're not supposed to enjoy anything. And if they think that you're enjoying something, then they take it away. Now, and this is something that they're taught in the academy there. And so, even if you have permission, they come and take it all away from you periodically and just, tear it up, throw it away, whatever. But they are also very concerned about people having any kind of empowerment. And telling their story. Utah actually passed a law that inmates are not allowed to, make any money or gain anything off of their situation. Whatever happened to them, you're not allowed to talk about it and get paid, theoretically. You can't write a book. Other people can write a book about you and make money, but you're not allowed to. So it's, they're afraid. They don't want any scrutiny of how things are in there. And even when there's been people that the Innocence Project has taken up their cases in Utah and won them, and these people have been awarded $1 million, and the state just appeals it over and over and over. So you never, the people never actually get anything. It's not about rehabilitating people, and even that's kind of a misnomer. There's a lot of people that do need rehabilitative services, but there are a lot of people that just need, I don't know, I would call it more supportive services, so that you have options. You have some skills, you have some knowledge on how to get skills, you have some kind of a pathway towards being able to envision your success. And what does that look like? If you've got young people in there that are third generation, substance abuse family type places, it's, they don't know. They haven't seen it. They don't know what success looks like. They don't know what it sounds like. They don't know what the ingredients are. And so it takes a lot to, help folks like that. But it behooves all of us. It's a benefit to society as a whole if we take the time to, help re-educate people to, who they can be, what their potential is, how they have value. But the system, all it does is tell you that you don't have any value. I asked the deputy warden why we didn't have job training programs on the women's side, but they did on the men. And he said that it wasn't worth taxpayers' money to waste on education for women because all we were going to do was go out and have babies. So, that's the mentality in Utah. And they see educated women as being in direct competition with men that need jobs. So, they kind of want to keep us in a different stratosphere there.
Yeah, on that topic, one of the questions I am curious about are when it comes to fears, assumptions, judgments, lack of equity, what are some of the things that you found to be prolific or that you experienced in a very real way during this time of your life?
Well, one of the very first thing that I saw was that just the attitude about domestic violence was so archaic. The prosecutors put out a statement saying that it probably was self-defense, but what they would never know is what I must have said to provoke the need to defend myself. And so that was kind of it just sets the tone that you really have no defense, period. You're a woman, you didn't do what you were told, you're in the wrong, period. Whatever happens to you, oh well. Then you get to prison and you think, well, maybe I can fight my case, maybe I can file an appeal. And you find out that the men's prison has a law library, but the women's prison does not. And that really blew me away. They had they had this program that they started. Oh gosh, it was called it was a gender-based program, but they made it sound like they had investigated what women needed, and that was going to help our situation be better. But all it ended up being is that they had studied women to see what we responded to or what bothered us the most, and they used it against us. And so, like, if anytime somebody started to make noise about something, legitimately complain about an issue on how we were being treated, they would single that person out and take them aside and say, well, if you don't stop this, we're going to take everything away from all the other women. And so most women at that point would quit, because they don't want to cause everybody else to lose their phone calls with their children, or the ability to make anything at all. The last fight that I had with them I was doing a project for, it was a battered women's shelter, and they were having an art auction, and I had gotten permission to do 6 pieces. And the captain sent SWAT in and just said, take it all, throw it away. And when I reiterated that I had a signed contract that he'd even signed that gave me permission to do this, and the show was like 2 weeks away, he asked to see the papers, took them away from me, and said, well, I rescind it, and just tore them up. And they took everything. And, I tried to keep a low profile. I was compliant and respectful to everybody. So it's not like I was, acting out in a way that would have given them any cause to be that punitive towards me. But they just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that no matter what they gave you, they could take it away at any moment, that you were not entitled to anything.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, in addition to all of the other things that we've talked about so far, certainly the topic of power comes into play in these conversations as well. What is the number one way, or what are some of the most profound ways that art has been a self-empowerment resource to you, even amidst times where the system's trying to strip you of all of your power. How does art help you to move forward, see inspiration in the next day or even in the next moment?
This is a multi-level thing when it comes to the benefit. I mean, number one, you are developing things. You know, you might be in solitary confinement and nobody sees what you're doing, and it's just you and your pencil and your paper, but you can see how you're developing a skill, and that gives you a feeling of competency. And if you can develop competency at one thing, then it's easier to imagine yourself developing competency in some other area. And so that builds upon itself to where you get to the point where you think, you know, I really can do anything that I set my mind to. So you've got that fact that it's basically therapeutic. You know, you can either explore, you know, images that give you comfort, that take you to a different place. You can create images that exercise the demons that are tormenting your soul. You can do things to connect with your family. You know, there's just so many different ways physically. And, you know, it's just something to focus on that's productive. And then in the very real sense, like I said, you know, you have something to give to your family or your loved ones. And then beyond that, it gives you a voice when you can send it out to someplace like JAC and they can use it in an exhibit and you get feedback from people and it affects people. It's like I had sent one of the first images that I did was the woman impaled on bars, and I've done it in several different ways, and I did an embroidered piece that had, I used thread, just plain thread, and so there was about 1,000 stitches per square inch in this piece, and I sent it out to my daughter, and she put it in an exhibit, and it had an explanation next to it about, you know, the despondency and the pain that you feel when you feel like your life is over and, you know, there go your hopes and dreams and your children and everything's gone. And she said that people just stood there looking at it with tears running down their faces. It really impacted folks. And to me, that's a successful piece of work. You know, if it affects people and they remember it for the rest of their lives, whether it's because they loved it or it was disturbing, you know, that's a good piece of art.
Absolutely. As you know, Carole, Brett will be joining us again here shortly. But, you know, until he gets back on the call, and we'll come back to this at the end, Carole, but share with our group how they can find your GoFundMe page. What do you need? What do you need from us? What actions can you take to make a bit of difference? Share with the audience how we can find you online.
I think if you Google Desert Fish House, it will take you to the GoFundMe page and a variety of other things having to do with my artwork. But it's Desert Fish House Hope and Healing Project, and it's basically right now I'm trying to get the infrastructure in place. I needed a place to be. This is another thing. When you're a woman and you're labeled as a violent felon, you are cut out of all you know, rental situations, or, you know, you can't get housing, you can't get a job. It's just, you know, you're pretty much relegated to being homeless, you know, living in your car. So I decided to go outside the box a little bit, and I had enough money from the stimulus check and a speaking engagement to put down payment on 80 acres. And I moved out here in a tent a little over a year ago on Memorial Day. And I've been collecting pallets and scraps of building supplies ever since. And I have some structures partway built, but the weather got too bad. And I had an injury last fall, and so I wasn't able to get the roof over my structure, and I spent the majority of the winter with 5 sleeping bags and 2 hot water bottles inside of a 3-sided pallet structure. And it got down to 6 below. And I would really like to have a roof this year. Roof.
You know what,
So,
Carole? We
some
would love
specific build materials.
We would love for you to have a roof as well. Daphne posted the link for everyone, and we're going to ask you a few more questions about that before the end of the event. But we're going to pivot here just for a few minutes. We have Brett back on the line.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Brett.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for coming back and joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about, you shared with us the other day on our meeting about reentry and discharge and how you see art helping you through that reentry process. I found it fascinating that you don't know sort of that waiting game and the mental unrest that must cause the inability to plan for your future in a way that most of us are used to. But would you share with the audience, like, when you think about, first of all, how the reentry process would work for you, and then how do you see art continuing to be that self-empowerment resource, how you envision yourself continuing to be involved with JAC and just other plans for yourself as you move forward?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm in an interesting position right now where there is a program that's offered by the Federal Bureau of Prisons that can allow somebody to get off slightly earlier than they would normally. But unfortunately, there's no way to kind of know for sure that you can get into the program or even qualify for that time off until that time comes. So right now I'm kind of in a waiting game. I could leave as early as a year and 5 months from now, or I can leave 3 years from now. And so it's a little hard for me to plan specifically to get ready for it. And it's hard for me to kind of believe it, that after so many years I could be coming so close to the end. It's almost impossible for me to wrap my mind around it. When we had our conversation prior to this engagement, you asked me a question about kind of like what I was thinking of doing art-wise to get myself prepared for kind of releasing it, if I was thinking of like a giant project or not. And I didn't. I didn't because we're kind of still in COVID lockdown, but I felt like it was kind of a challenge in a way, in a really good way, to kind of focus me and try to provide something for me not only to work on, so I can get through this kind of time of unknown, but also focus me where I can start thinking about how I can meaningfully help others through my art in a way that is only possible with me being at this position in my life, with me doing so much time, for me making all the relationships that I've made with people in here, with me making all the relationships I've made with people out there. And I kind of see a lot of things kind of converging at once right now that I hope will allow me to produce something meaningful to kind of work my way out the door. When I get out, my dream, my ultimate dream is to be an artist, to be a working artist, to be able to live off my art. And at the same time, I have this other kind of idea that perhaps I can do some kind of advocacy work or work in the nonprofit sphere, and what that would look like and how that would go. I'm not quite sure. But giving back to my community is always something that's been important to me with my plans about coming out. And when I thought my community prior to coming into incarceration, I would think of my parents, right? Or maybe like the people that physically live around me. But now I kind of see community as people who have the same kind of shared life experience with me. When I get out, I will spend about a third of my life incarcerated. So it's kind of impossible for me to see myself separate from everyone else in here who has come in here or has left. This is my community in a way. And I'd really like to be able to continue to make impacts for them.
Wow. I'm kind of blown away by all of the things you just shared. I think I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, so to speak, and I'm thinking of all the different feelings I would have and the unknowns. So, like you said, it's hard to almost believe because you spent so much time where you're at. How are you working to, what helps you most when alleviating some of those fears? Is there anything that all of us can do to help inspire, encourage, or give you added strength as you embark upon this next huge stage in your journey? Can you share more about that with the audience?
One of the things that really drives me to do like what we're doing right now, to have these conversations, and I've been very, very, very lucky and grateful to be a part of a couple of conversations like this, is I have a goal to really kind of challenge the expectations that the audience may have of people who find themselves incarcerated. My ultimate hope is that maybe people out there can start to question who is exactly in here with me, who I am, what kind of beliefs I have, and what kind of beliefs and dreams that other people in here have, and start to kind of break down those barriers. I think the biggest thing that everyone can do to support not just me, but everyone, is to really start to question those expectations of who we are when we come into the community, instead of going back to the assumption that perhaps that we are never incapable of overcoming our past, or that we're inherently more dangerous than another person. To start to ask, well, it was also that person that happened to speak, about their art or paint this work or do this art project, right? And maybe those people aren't that different than my people. And I think that's the greatest thing we can do, is start to dissolve those kind of labels, not just in language, but in working understanding, and start to see people as just people. And that's the biggest thing that could happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you bring up. And of course, one of the most important points I think of this conversation is the way that we have, right, stigmatized folks who have been incarcerated and that have criminal backgrounds. In what other part of life are you not able to have the chance to restart? And where else are we not allowed second chances, or the ability to not have to carry some of that with us in a very public way? I think that there are lots of things that we all carry with us internally, but certainly being incarcerated, having a criminal record, is something that is internal and external. It's a public record. It's something that, right? I mean, Carole talked about this. In order to find a place to live, right? People are going to ask you if you have a criminal background. So just your simple right to work and live somewhere are impacted by this thing that doesn't seem to go away for a lot of folks. You said when you get out, one of the things you want to do, you just want to be an artist. What does that look like for you? Is that if you had to sort of share with us that pathway for you today. And I realize that that could change over time. But is it, you know, going to school? Is it trying to set up some kind of center? Is it starting an LLC? How do you envision making that transition specifically regarding art as your path forward and as your career?
So I think that's kind of the hardest part, because one of the things that I don't think people fully understand until they become incarcerated themselves is what an extreme lack of information and resources we have in here. Prior to coming into prison, I was not an artist. I never did art, right? So I don't know what the art field actually looks like. I don't really know how people live off their art. So it's like this nebulous dream to me. And so one of the first things I want to do is find that out, because it's not like I can do a Google search to see how people do it, or have long engaged conversations with people who are artists to find that information. We just don't have that ability to really prepare ourselves for being out there, whether we want to be an artist or work in some kind of trade. It's us just kind of dreaming in here, and then just having to kind of hit the ground running once we get out and trying to figure that all out from scratch. It's something that I'm looking forward to, because it's better than this, but something that's very daunting.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think, so, I mean, again, part of what I want to do today is call our audience to action. And even if it's not themselves immediately, it's like, who do we know that we can connect, make connections with and for? So I would say, I would challenge our audience, if anyone has an interest in, right, working with Brett in any way, whether that's, you know, communication, resources, information. I'm not all sure exactly what we can and cannot do. I know there are tons of rules and limitations around those things. So that's really hard, because audience, one of the things I asked Brett is, can I send you money? Can I send you supplies? Can I send you art products? And he said, no. They're still on, you know, what, a lockdown?
You're good, Kate. Go
Yeah, so I mean, I think that you know, it's tricky to find out what we can do, but certainly anyone on the audience that has an interest could probably reach out to Wendy, right? And you would be able to provide either a connection or more information about what we can actually do. So we only have a few minutes left. You know, and as always, the conversation is way too short. But before we go, I absolutely want to come back to Carole one last time and say, you know, Carole, Brett as well, but you know, your story has certainly moved me, given me so much to think about. I really haven't even been able to process fully what my thoughts are. I love that sound though in the background. That's awesome. Carole, one last time, what can we do? If there's something you need, if there's something this audience can do to take action to help you, or to support you, or to be an advocate for you, or to just show you that we care, whatever it is you need, what can we do?
One of the things that is a real physical need is components to a solar system. When we get to the point where I've got solar panels, I have some solar panels, but I can't afford the batteries or the controller. So that's the kind of thing that would really free up a lot of time. I would be able to refrigerate food, have heat and cooling systems, and you know, because right now it's just basic survival. You know, it's kind of been the worst camping trip ever for this past year, but you know, that's that's the main thing, is to spread the word and see if, I mean, even if there's some companies out there that would donate solar equipment, we could use this as some kind of a test market thing for people that are off grid, because off grid stuff is getting huge right now. It's basic to make progress, you know, being able to acquire, you know, I mean, I can get a lot of lumber for free because I get pallets and you know, old tires and things like that to build with, but the gas to go get them is prohibitive. And so there are times when people donate supplies that I'm not able to access just because I don't have a means to you know, drive in and get them. It's you know, and the upkeep on trailers and things like that. But the solar thing is a really big deal right now, because that, and free up a lot of my time to actually get the things done that I need to make this ready for other people to come out here.
Thank you, Carole. So I would say the same thing. If for any reason you're having difficulties,
And I know, you know,
Daphne's inserted the link there again for the Desert Fish House GoFundMe. If you're having troubles at all connecting up with Carole, again, I believe Wendy would be more than happy to take those communications and help to connect. We have 2 minutes left, and in those final minutes, I would love to hear, Wendy, from you one last time. Again, call to action. What can we do so that when we leave this call, we don't just go on with our day, forget about, you know, how many lives we could touch by elevating this conversation more effectively. What can we do, Wendy?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to building relationships, and that might look for you like joining a pen pal program like ours. Ours is arts focused. I know the link's in the chat. It's called the Partner Project, but there are a number of other kinds of pen pal programs across the country. It might look like volunteering to go inside of a local facility and offering some sort of arts program, or partnering with a local nonprofit to do that. It may look like participating in programming with folks who've recently come home into your community, but it's about building those relationships, making sure you're creating space in your heart and mind for people's stories and experiences and learning from those, and then acting from those, and from the feelings and ideas that those stories, those people's lives, you know, their experiences evoke in you.
Thank you. And Wendy, thanks for gifting us your time and knowledge and heart and passion today. As always, very moved by our panelists, their expertise and knowledge and the value that they bring to the conversation of equity in the arts. So with that being said, thank you so much for your attendance today, and we will see you at the next seat at the table. Have a great day.